Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Today we are going to discuss about Sufism and Islamic reform. How the Sufis contributed to the Islamic reform and revival in the early Islamic history and to the modern period too. The Sufis, who were known as masters of the spirituality or mysticism in Islam, at the same time they actually have contributed to uh, many Islamic fields too, like philosophy, ilmul kalam, metaphysics, and anti-colonial activities too. And they have produced a huge number of literature, especially in different fields of Islamic studies branches. So we have to consider all these dimensions in this discussion. First of all, whenever we discuss about the Sufis, first the spirituality or mysticism comes to our mind. Of course, that is the first and basic stance of the Sufis, because they stands for the propagation and preaching and the purification of hearts and minds of Muslims for their respective centuries. If you look at any Sufis like Maulana Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, or Sheikh Ahmad Yasavi, Haja Bektashi Wali, Bayram Wali, these scholars they propagated Islam in Turkic Turkic Islamic world. Like Haji Bektashi Wali, he was the one of the biggest Sufi saints at that time in the early 10th century, and Sheikh Ahmad Yasavi, the founder of Yasaviya Silsila. He was also one of the biggest Sufi saints in Turkic Islamic area. He, with Bayram Wali and Haji uh, Sheikh Adabali, all these scholars, Sufi scholars, they propagated Islam among this Turkic tribe, Turkic ethnic community. And because of their own contribution, huge number of people embraced Islamic faith at that time. And whenever we look at the Sufi history and their lineage, like Muinuddin Chishti, Bahauddin, Naqshbandi, and Shihabuddin Suhrawardi, Zakaria Multani, the biggest Sufi names of four Sufi silsilas. Like Muinuddin Chishti, he came from Central Asia. He has a Turkic origin. And Zakaria Multani, Zakaria Suhrawardi, he was a student of Shihabuddin Suhrawardi from this Iranian Central Asian area. And Bahauddin Naqshbandi, the founder of eponymous founder of Naqshbandiya Silsila, he also from this Naqshband, from Central Asia, Turkic area. And Abdul Qadir Jilani and his students. Of course, Abdul Qadir Jilani, he is from Arabia, Iran and Iraq region. But the Qadiriya Silsila has huge followers among the South Asian, Southeast Asian places too. And Qadiriya Silsila is the one of the biggest Sufi Silsila in the world. So Qadiriya Silsila has some kind of Arabic connection, and apart from that, all other Sufi silsilas are from the Turkic region. So these Sufi silsilas contributed for the propagation and preaching of Islam, and they made many people from Iranian, Central Asian, Turkic region, made them converted to Islam or embraced Islam in on their respective periods. So in the fields of propagation and preaching, these Sufi tariqats uh, showed the huge contribution in this respective area. At the same time, these Sufi scholars, they have produced many literature. Like how these Sufi scholars approach the writings and their literature field. In India, whenever look at the South Indian Sufi scholars' history, like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, many Sufi scholars they use the vernacular languages. They studied the languages and they used these vernacular local languages, and they produced the literature like Indian idihasa, Indian mythology. In Kerala too, we have Muhyiddin Mala. Muhyiddin Mala means the Mala means the it's some kind of song. It's about Abdul Qadir Jilani, Muhyiddin Sheikh Muhyiddin Abdul Qadir Jilani. These scholars, the Indian scholars or South Indian scholars, use the vernacular language or local language to produce the literature to teach Islamic heroes, Islamic biggest personalities like these Mahabharata and Ramayana. We know that the Indian sadhus, Indian scholars, Hindu scholars, they wrote their own heroes and in prose and poetry, and it became popular among the Hindu masses and even in every community in Indian subcontinent. The same way, these Sufi scholars adapted the same way, and they use these vernacular languages. They use the prose and poetry of Indian style, and they elaborated the lifestyle and their experience and teachings in this prose and poetry. So these kind of style were used by the Sufi scholars, especially in South India, in Kerala too. We can find many instances, many examples of their writings, like Muhyiddin Mala. Some scholars in Kerala, they use this the Badar Mala, and Pakshipat, and these are different kind of songs written by the Sufi scholars to teach the masses about Islamic heroes, like by adapting Indian style of writing of mythology. So that was the style of literature in India or Indian subcontinent. In other part of the Indian subcontinent, where these scholars also use same kind of writing or literature in Indian subcontinent, and these Sufi scholars in the global level, they have produced a huge number of literature, especially Islamic spirituality. Some scholars who were a master of the Ilmul Kalam and metaphysics, of course, they were the master of the spirituality, mysticism. Because of these dimensions, most of the Sufi scholars were involved in metaphysical Ilmul Kalam and philosophical discourse and debates at that time. We can find out from Abdul Hakim Tirmidhi. He was known as the first man who introduced this kind of mystical discourse in the writing, and he was influenced by the Greek philosophy at that time, and he has many writings related to the explanation, interpretation of the dream, ilmu ta'bir, different discussions in his works. Tirmidhi, Abdul Hakim Tirmidhi, that was one of the biggest name in Sufi scholars. So the philosophy and metaphysics, the Ilmul Kalam discussions, where they have huge place in Sufi discourses. So all these dimensions shows that the Muslim scholars were pioneers of discussion of the philosophy, metaphysics, and Ilmul Kalam at that time. And this discussion shows that the dynamicism of Islam or Muslims to engage in this discussion too. They were competing the Greek philosophers or Persian or Indian philosophers in these fields at that time. At the same time, apart from their literature, they have initiated different kind of organization at that time that is known as tariqa. Actually, tariqa, we consider tariqa as some kind of a mass group who just wish to wander across the places from one place to another place, just like nomads. Actually, that is not correct perception about the tariqa. Actually, the Tariqa is some kind of organization. Actually, it was a cadre style organization. They have huge connection deep connection between Sheikh and Murid and to the followers. They have different hierarchy in this Tariqa style. Like the Sheikh means the Sufi master, and he has different representative that is known as Khalifa, that is known as Khalifa. So these Khalifas or representatives, they will propagate and preach, and they will follow the correct ideas and regulations of Sheikh, and they will lead the ideas of Sheikh to the different part of the region. And these Khalifas have their own followers. Each one Khalifas have their own followers. So after the Khalifa, this Sheikh has different kind of followers, that is known as Murid. We know the peer murid connection, that is the murid. So, and after murid they have huge mass following. This kind of cadre style organization was known as actually tariqa. Then this tariqa was leading, controlling Muslim mobility or Islamic mobility, as the famous Turkish sociologist Sharif Mardin says. He says that the tariqa, he says the Tariqa is some kind of Muslim, they control the Muslim mobility on their respective places. So these, by using the Tariqa, uh, these Sufi scholars led many communities uh, towards Islam. By using these tariqa, they have actively engaged in a spiritual, social, and political scenario too in different span of the history. Like Bektashiya Tariqa. Let's discuss about the Bektashiya Tariqa. This Tariqa was famous in the time of emergence of Usmani ruling family, because the Suleiman Shah and his son Ertugrul and his son Usman. In this time, the Bektashi Sheikh Haji Behram Wali and the Haji Fatima Baji and this Sheikh Edabali. These all Sufi leaders were political counselors of this Usmani family, like Sulaiman Shah, Ertugrul, and this Usman first, and they were became some kind of paramilitary for this Usmani family too, and they were like political counselors and spiritual counselors and paramilitary too at that time. So these and they use their own these organization tariqa to help this Usmani family to face different political, spiritual situations at that time. And after the establishment of the principality under the leadership of this Usman, they became the teachers and counselors of the Usmani Khilafa, Usmani the leadership. At the same time, whenever we look at the situation in Indian subcontinent, after the establishment of Delhi Sultanate, many Sufi sheikh came with huge followings, and all their Sufi silsilas were patronized by respective Delhi Sultanates at that time, because the Sufi, the Sultan Sultan knows that the powerful of tariqa, and if he patrons these Sufi tariqas, then it means he got huge popularity among the Muslim masses too. So the sultans was ready to patron the Sufi silsilas. At the same time, the Sufi sheikh used or utilized the power of sultan to propagate his ideas and to propagate Islam among the places under that sultan or ruler, Muslim ruler. So that was the connection of these Sufi tariqats and Muslim rulers at that time. They both used each other to aim or to propagate their own intentions, to use their own intentions at that time. These this way, the many Sufi scholars use the political power of these Muslim rulers to propagate or to do the reform and revival among the Muslim masses. Two kind of reforms they did. One, the propagation of Islam, means the da'wah to the non-Islamic community, non-Muslim communities. Second one, the reform within the communities, that is known as Islah. So, because of the endeavors of many Sufi scholars, the Muslim community became more purified at that time. They used their own propagation within the community. Like when we look at the history of Jalaluddin Rumi, we can find out that he, because of his teachings, his lessons, his propagations, the Muslims, they were just nominal Muslims at that time. They became good devotees towards the Lord at that time. We can find out these same instance examples in the different scholars like Abdul Qadir Jilani, all these Bahauddin Naqshbandi, Moinuddin Chishti, Zakaria Multani. In here in Assami region, means the northeast region, like Azan Fakir was the biggest name in northeastern region, and Mullah Mujarrad Shah, another Sufi, the famous Sufi in Assami region, especially the northeastern region, because of their endeavors and attempts, most of the Muslims became good Muslims, means the good religious Muslims because of their endeavors. So these kind of two attempts, two kind of reforms. One is the dawah to non-Muslims. Second one is the islah to within the community reform. So these kind of activism can be seen in the reform history of reform of Sufi scholars. And another dimension of reforms of Sufis, that is they were fighting in the name of Islam against the enemies of Islam. Like as I said before, these Sufi scholars, these Sufi tariqas help the Muslim dynasties against their enemies, and uh, they take as a jihad against the enemies. Like the Usmani family, they used, or these Sufi tariqas helped Usmani family to fight against the Mongols and Byzantines at that time. And in the modern time also, the Sheikh Shamil, Imam Shamil of Naqshbandiya Sufi Silsila, he led his followers against USSR army in the 19th century. And in another Naqshbandi Sufi scholar like Sayyid Ahmad Shahid and Shah Ismail Shahid, they were leaders of Naqshbandiya Silsila, and they fought against Britishers and Sikh armies in the 19th century in Peshawar Sindh area. In India, in Kerala, in the 16th century, the first freedom fighter against the Western colonialism was the Sheikh Zainuddin Makhdoom first, who wrote the work Tahril al-Iman ala Abdat sulban, means he issued decree, fatwa for Muslims to fight against these Portuguese army because they first came to Kerala. They and he issued fatwa to organize under a Hindu king to fight against this Portuguese army. He was Chishti Sufi Sheikh. Sheikh Zainuddin Makhdoom was Chishti Sufi Sheikh. And his son, Sheikh Abdul Aziz, and his grandson, Sheikh Zainuddin Makhdoom II. This grandson, Sheikh Zainuddin Makhdoom II, he was also biggest scholar. He wrote Tuhfat al-Mujahideen, means the gift for a mujahid who were fighting against the Portuguese army in Jari. And these scholars were Chishti Sufi scholars. In the 19th century in Kerala, the Mampuram family, Sayyid family of Kerala. They are known as Mampuram Tangal, Mampuram Sayyid family. The Sayyid Alavi and his son Sayyid Fadlullah. They were leaders, socio-political, religious leaders of Malabari Indian Kerala Muslims, and they fought, literally fought against this British imperialism. They were Balavi Sufi Tariqat from Yemen. So these kind of activism, like anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist activism, was also the part of revivalist attempts or reformist attempts of Sufi scholars in different span of the history, time of the history. And these ideas, like from the starting from the spirituality in different Islamic studies discourses like philosophy, metaphysics, ilmul kalam, and fiqh and history, these scholars were huge. They hugely produced works in different field of the Islamic studies too, like some were faqih, some were historians, some were mufassirs, and some Sufi scholars were political philosophers too, like Ibn Arabi. We have a discussion about the Khilafah. There is a discussion about Aimat min Quraysh, means the Khalifa must be from the Qurayshi family. That is one report related to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, in generally, in Islamic political philosophy, we discuss about that the Khalifa must be from the Qurayshi tribe. So that was the narration from since different centuries. But after these Usmanis, Ottoman leaders became the rulers of this Turkic Central Asian area, these discussion emerged in front of them. Then Ibn Arabi, he connected the idea of Khilafah for these Ottoman sultanates. Because in history, Islamic history, Khalifa is a Khalifatul Rasulillah, the representative of the Prophet Muhammad. But in Quran, Allah says, "Inni ja'ilun fil ardi Khalifa." The means I am creating one Khalifa on earth, means in Quran it's a Khalifatullah, in Hadith it's a Khalifat Rasulullah. Then Ibn Arabi gives the political, religious, and metaphysical idea, this Khalifa or Khilafa, and he interprets that a ruler is a Khalifatullah, at the same time it's a Khalifatullah. Then this idea this was adapted by Usmani rulers, and they started to preach the idea. Then we are Khalifatullah. So they could rescued from the traditional Islamic political philosophy that is made by the Khalifa must be Arabic origin or Qurayshi origin, because they were Turkic origin. So they used, so these Turkic scholars, Turkish really these rulers, Osmanis, they used this idea of Ibn Arabi to validate their own Islamic leadership, the Khalifatullah. And from that period, Sheikh Ibn Arabi became the biggest supremo of spirituality, of religious spheres for these Usmani rulers. Up to the 20th century too, there were many studies from Usmani scholars about Sheikh Ibn Arabi and his philosophy and his political philosophy too. And there are many other dimensions to Islamic reform, like in India, in the time of Akbar regime. That was the biggest name was Sayyid Ahmad Sarhindi, the famous personality, famous Sufi Sheikh who defeated the new religion created by Akbar the Emperor, Deen-e Ilahi. Sayyid Ahmad Sarhindi, he destroyed the concept of Deen-e Ilahi. He challenged the concept of Deen-e Ilahi, and the scholars who were supporting the idea of Akbar at that time. And after this Akbar, Jahangir came in the time of the rules of Jahangir. Sayyid Ahmad Sarhindi totally engaged with the idea of Deen Ilahi, and because of his endeavors, the Deen Ilahi vanished from the earth or discourse from the Islamic field. So these kind of endeavors can be added to the discourse of Islamic reform of Sufi scholars from different span of the time, different span of the history. It starts from the spirituality and their huge contribution to the Islamic literature. Some scholars, as I said before, they utilize the vernacular languages and vernacular cultural systems to teach Islamic lessons to the masses. And they were pioneers of the Dawah and Islah, Dawah to the non-Muslim communities and Islah, the reform within the communities, like Abdul Qadir Jilani, Jalaluddin Umari, and Sarhindi, and they were anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist activists too in different times, and they were some kind of paramilitary for the Muslim rulers to fight against Islamic enemy or Muslim enemy in different times, and they were philosophers and they were political philosophers too at that time, and they hugely produced many Islamic terminologies that became parallel, or these terminologies could actually autonomous monopoly over different political ideas of at that time, and they initiated a proto-Islamic movement that is known as Tariqa, and this Tariqa became the tool for propagation and Islah in throughout the century, and they were, as I said before, anti-colonialist activists too, and they uh, tried to protect their own places, and even they cooperated with Hindu kings to fight against the common enemy, these imperialist armies like Portuguese and British in Indian subcontinent. So these were the reform and revival attempts of Sufi scholars of Islam. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.